G'day guys, and welcome to another Phil and Jen in the Philippines. I'm Phil, I'm not in the Philippines, I'm in Australia, but I thought I'd pass on some information regarding travelling and transport in the Philippines. Okay, as normal, can you subscribe, can you leave a comment, ring the notifications, ring the bells, all that type of thing. Okay, getting around in the Philippines. For you guys that haven't been there before or have only travelled there for short periods of time, I'm just going to list certain things that you may want to look at. First of all, as you arrive in the Philippines for any extended period of time, you've got to get around. A lot of you will be tempted to race out and hire motorcycles and this type of thing, but a word of caution, as I've done previously, driving in Asia takes a fair bit of getting used to with the lack of perceived rules. So I would suggest you don't do that straight away unless you are a very competent rider and have done it in your own home countries. And then even as a competent rider, you've still got to get used to the rhythms that go along with traveling and riding in the Philippines. The next thing is obviously, you can buy a car. Everyone usually can drive, but again, you've still got to get used to the rhythms of driving in Asia and what you're expected to do. So it's a daunting task, especially from an outsider's point of view. When you look at it, you think it's absolute chaos, but I'll tell you, it is organised chaos once you get used to it. There are certain regulations that people look at. As an example of that, small gives way to big, big gives way to bigger, that type of thing. There's no give way to the left or right. It's sneak in when you can. You've got to be very, very patient if you're driving on the roads over there. The other thing that a lot of Westerners don't get used to, myself included, is the amount of times they use the horn. And rather than the way I took it when I first got there, because the horns are only used in emergency situations or in fits of anger in Australia, New Zealand and most Western countries, it took a lot of getting used to the amount of horn usage when driving on the road in the Philippines. But it soon became aware that they use the horn over there not so much as an emergency device, but as a notification device when they're about to overtake you, when they think you can't see them, rather than rely on them looking in the rear vision mirrors and whatever. They usually blow the horn. It's not a lean-on situation where you get an extended period of horn use. It's usually a bip-bip type thing, and it's just to notify you that they're there and they're about to do something, such as overtake you. So you get used to that. It is a noisy place to get round. But what I would suggest before you go headlong into hiring motorcycles, because as I stated before in another video, there's so many bodies that come home from Asian countries back to their home countries because they've been involved in motorcycle accidents, especially. Not so much cars, because you have a certain amount of protection around you, and the speeds are not great in the Philippines. This is another reason I'd suggest to people that when they're coming out, if you're a motorcycle enthusiast, the first thing you think of is, hey, I'm going to bring my Harley out here, I'm going to bring my Ducati or whatever it happens to be. Apart from being a very expensive exercise as far as import duty is concerned, you really don't get the type of road conditions where a performance machine of that type is utilised. The roads are not in the best of conditions in the majority of the Philippines. The traffic is slow, it's congested. So, like going to that expense, apart from if you're a real enthusiast, and bringing a bike out is just not worth the time, effort and energy, in my opinion. The other thing is too, as far as motorcycles are concerned, I'm 6'1.5", 6'2", and the motorcycles available to you for purchase or for hire usually range between about 110cc and 155ccs. Now, I was very self-conscious when I got on the bike. I suppose it's the Western ego that, I look like a pimple on a pumpkin or a bloody a moose on a trike. No one really takes any notice of whether you're dressed appropriately or you're looking cool. That all goes by the boards. So don't worry about it. Pop on the cycle that's available. A lot of Chinese motorcycles are available in the Philippines. However, Rusty is about the only one that provides spare parts. So if you buy a cheap motorcycle over there, it may go reasonably well for a while, but getting spare parts is difficult. So stick to the Japanese brands if you can. You should be paying around about, for the lower CCR motorcycle, around 75,000 pesos, up to around 150,000 pesos for a reasonably high-end 155cc motorcycle. Not that expensive, and they're cheap to run as opposed to motor vehicles, because the price of diesel and petrol in the Philippines is about the same as you'd pay in the United States and Australia and whatever. So it's not cheap. So the cheaper you can get around, the better. But getting back to those who are a little bit apprehensive about getting on the road themselves, and I suggest, even if you are a good cyclist, as I said before, or a good motorist, do it this way. For local drives, when you get over there, trikes are always good. They're very cheap. When I say they're very cheap, if you're traveling with a young lady or a companion, a Filipino, you'll get it a damn side cheaper, simply because a normal fare, like a short taxi ride, a short trike ride, should cost you about 20-25 pesos per person. Whereas if you got in by yourself, it's not unusual they'll charge you 50 or 75 pesos as your foreigner a premium. So if you travel with a fellow and they let them pay, then you'll get around relatively cheaply. Having said that, compared to taxi prices in the West, even paying the foreigner premium is cheap. So you can also, if need be, in a lot of areas in the Philippines, there are cyclists which are for hire. When I say cyclists, they're motorcycle riders that'll hang around in groups, and you can then pay them to, as we say in Australia, dink or double up on the motorcycle, and they'll take you places as well. So there's that to look out for. And of course, for those of you who are fitter, you've always got push bikes and whatever, and you can pick up reasonably good quality push bikes. A little bit expensive compared to where we're from, but they're a good mode of transport. What's becoming more and more popular in the Philippines are electric vehicles, electric scooters, electric bikes, but they are sold at a premium. That might be an alternative. But actually getting around the Philippines itself, if you're utilising the major centres taxis, the majority of taxis in Davao and Manila are metered, so make sure the meter's on. Some other centres and some of the taxi services don't have a meter, so you'll have to negotiate the price before you travel. So keep that in mind. The taxis are reasonable. You can't say there's any luxury service. I'm not 100% sure whether the equivalent of Uber, which is usually GrabACab, and in Manila, that to me, as far as travelling around Manila and places like that, is probably easiest to GrabACab, which is a privately owned vehicle, similar to an Uber service. They're usually clean, they're modern vehicles, they're air conditioned, and they're cheap. They're a lot cheaper than taxis. So I'd look at that. So it's GrabACab. I spoke about that in another video. But let's say, for instance, getting around the Philippines, you've just arrived and you want to have a look at the place. You can do it one of two ways. You can do it on a motorcycle, and these little 150cc's, 155cc's, which will actually take you all over the Philippines. So a little bit uncomfortable, and you've got to put up with the searing heat and the rain and whatever, but a lot of you guys out there, it's a challenge. You don't have to go too far, great distances, so you can do it in small hops, but it's those little motorcycles are quite capable of taking you all over the Philippines. But the one I would suggest is using the coach and bus services in the Philippines. I'm not talking about the native buses or the jeepneys and whatever, although they're a bit of fun to actually go on short distances. They're jeepney, you can look them up. They're usually truck motors and very noisy. They're a covered vehicle, colourful. They're the signature vehicle of the Philippines. You'll often see them in tourist type advertisements, and as I said, it's the native way to travel around distances, and they cart everything from people to merchandise, pigs, chickens, whatever, and it's a bit of an event just to have a go at one. But the ones that I would suggest to go around the Philippines is the coach line system, and it's a great system. It's cheap. They're usually air conditioned in the majority of the country. Very comfortable. I think a lot of them are sourced from Korea, and they're probably old coaches surplus to use in Korea, and they come over to the Philippines, and they actively take tourists and the populace around the Philippines. There's not very many places in the Philippines you can't get to by bus. It's not a quick service. Some of them have toilets on board. Some of them stop every once in a while for everyone to pile off and have a cigarette and go to the toilet and eat and that type of thing. But it's an adequate way of getting around the country. Now, as we all know, there's 7,500 islands in the Philippines, give or take. The majority of the Philippines, apart from Palawan and things like that, which are the islands which are vast distance away from the main islands of the Philippines, the majority of the Philippines proper can be reached by coach. And the way they do it is they have an extensive barge system, whereas the coaches or the cars or the bikes go onto a barge, they cross it to the next island, and away you go again. As I said, to see the Philippines, it's a very cheap way to do it, and I would suggest trying the coach lines. As I said, quite adequate, quite comfortable. Don't be surprised from time to time you'll have a breakdown, as with I've had on a number of occasions using the coaches, but everyone sits around, has a talk, and waits for the next coach to come along. They radio or telephone for a coach, and they'll come and pick you up again. When it comes to the outer islands, of course, then we come to the third mode, which is, what is it? Cebu Pacific is the main airline that goes into Ireland, and that's got a great coverage as well. It goes out to Palawan and a lot of the tourist destinations. A little bit expensive from time to time. I would suggest if you're doing some traveling in the Philippines and you want to do it by air, you download the Cebu Pacific app, and that's a pretty good app, and it'll also notify you on the cheapest days to travel. So that's traveling in the Philippines. I hope I've covered it adequately for you. Transportation, although slow, you can usually get anywhere you want to get, either publicly or privately in the Philippines, and it's not overly expensive to travel in the Philippines. If you just hunt up the cheapest prices, it's not like a camel train or whatever. You can do it. So I would suggest when you get there, have a look around before you settle anywhere. There's plenty of great places in the Philippines, and don't judge a place as you're looking from the window of a coach or a taxi, because from a Westerner's point of view, a lot of the Philippine cities look very similar, and it's not until you get out and you start to explore what that city has to offer that you actually find out the personality of that city and what benefits it may give to you if you decide to live there. So don't have a preconceived idea when you come over where exactly you're going to live. Explore as much as you can until you find somewhere that's your Shangri-La, and there's plenty of Shangri-Las in the Philippines. Okay, as I said, subscribe, comment, go from there. I look forward to your comments, and we'll see you in the next video. Cheers.